give up.
For the entire lifespan of the 5th generation of consoles, I was the prime demographic. I was a 5-year-old kid all the way up to an 11-year-old little boy. Some of my brightest gaming memories to this day are in the dawn to dusk timeframe of the N64 and its many, many exclusive and groundbreaking games. And with that said, I'm going to start saying some controversial things. The 5th generation of video games has aged like spoiled milk left in a broken refrigerator on a tropical island after the bombs drop. It's okay if that upsets you. I get it. It took me a really long time to accept this. And I'll come out right now and I'll say, of course, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic. There are definitely games on the N64 that hold up. Banjo-Kazooie, Mischief Makers, Star Fox 64, Sin and Punishment, the Mario Party games, Paper Mario, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask are close to not holding up, but I'll give them a pass. And, of course, the Tony Hawk games. And look, if you think that like any of the Turok games hold up in pretty much any regard apart from being a landmark for the time, no. The PC ports that you can get on Steam are the only way that those games are even playable. GoldenEye was revolutionary for its design philosophies and groundbreaking multiplayer, but you're lying to yourself if you think that the game is comparable to something remotely other than cute at this point. And now, this is where I kick the door open, fall on my face, look up at you with a tooth missing and blood in my mouth, and give you a thumbs up, and I say, Winback Covert Operations is still a really good fucking game. I remember getting it back in the twilight years of the console's lifespan at a GameStop on sale and popping that shit in and just being stunned about how unique it felt. Despite getting a copy of the game so late in the console's life, I distinctly declared it being one of the best games that I had played on the system. I had a bunch of games on the console by that time, and Winback Covert Operations beating out games like, well, pretty much every other game that I had mentioned previously is pretty crazy. Which I know is big praise coming from the guy that basically just said that your favorite N64 games probably suck shit. But throughout this video, I'm going to be asking a few questions to hopefully put some things into perspective. What about Winback was so unique for its time? Does it do what it did well back then, now? And how does it compare to other games that utilize the same central mechanic of Winback? So Winback came out in September of 1999, and as far as I'm aware, it was the very first instance of the use of cover shooting mechanics, at least in the console gaming sphere. The Time Crisis series was the only real big mainstream game that utilized this same mechanic seriously, but as it was a super fast-paced arcade shooter game, the use of the central cover mechanic was drastically different than its use in Winback. Time Crisis is a bullet-flying, almost rhythmically inclined quarter muncher that makes you feel like an actually competent version of Leslie Nielsen in this scene from The Naked Gun. But Winback being a console game has the opportunity and thankfully the wherewithal to slow things down and become a little bit more deliberate and thoughtful with its mechanics. The end result is a game that unironically feels genuinely revolutionary with not only what it was going for, but in terms of what it actually managed to accomplish, and it doesn't start and stop with the cover shooter mechanics. It helped inspire not only games like Metal Gear Solid 2...
Is that really Solid Snake?
That's what he claims.
No! That is not Solid Snake!
Gears of War, but was also in a sense the Resident Evil 4 we got before Resident Evil 4 with its completely unique for the time laser sight aiming mechanic. There's even more things that Winback did right, and I'll get to all of that, but for now, let me just talk about what makes Winback special and unique for its time. And that's the cover mechanic. Right from the start of the game, before you're even given control of your character Jean-Luc Cougar, which might be the most Japanese take on a cool American name that I think I've ever heard. The game forces you in the game's cover mechanics, and it makes you learn them through a very well-designed introductory level that teaches you everything you're going to be using throughout the rest of the game. Winback operates not in a run-and-gun manner, but in a very methodical, tactical, give-and-take, back-and-forth shooting spree where you duck behind cover, poke out, and shoot at your foes. Right off the bat, this gives Winback a realistic aura compared to most games released during its time, as though it still operates on a gamey damage and death system, you are forced to play the game very cautiously. poke your head out for too long, or get caught out in the open while running to cover, and you can take a shot to the body that can essentially take upwards of 90% of your HP away as fast as it takes to pump the barrel of a shotgun. The way the cover mechanics function is through a surprisingly simple lock-on functionality. So, just like Resident Evil 4, you're not allowed to move and shoot, which forces you to stand in place and aim your gun like a tank going into siege mode. You're equipped with 3 standard weapons: a pistol, a shotgun, and a submachine gun. While aiming, Jean-Luc can aim completely freely with the laser sight attached to each weapon. This is fine and all, but you'll quickly find out from the previously mentioned introductory encounter that if you just poke around the corner and aim, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Sure, you'll see a little aiming reticle pop up on him, and when you aim your weapon at him, your gun will sort of auto-lock onto him, but as soon as that guy takes cover, that safety net will vanish. How you play into Winback's mechanics is by hitting the lock-on button, which will add a square reticle on top of the already present one, which means that unless your enemy runs out of your range, then you will not lose sight of your target. What this also means is that your aim range is drastically focused. Where you could aim from the sky to the ground beforehand, now with the lock-on enabled, you can hold the control stick as tight to the sky as you want, and your laser sight will only partially go above your target's head. This targeting system opens up what would be a really simple and somewhat kinda cheesy mechanic into a tasty multi-layer lasagna. It's a frozen store-bought lasagna, but it's a tasty one. With enough experimenting, you'll find out that with the lock-on system enabled, you can mess with it and make it work to your benefit. You can also just do cool shit with it. For example, you are allowed to crouch to maneuver behind cover and also just to simply hide behind it. Now, with using the lock-on feature, you can aim before jumping up into the open, and with some skill and practice, you can essentially tweak your aiming just enough to pop off headshot after headshot and eliminate groups of enemies pretty fast and efficiently. And now you might be asking yourself, well, doesn't that just make the entire game trivial? No, for 2 reasons. Like I said, you can only really do this while crouch aiming, and not every instance of enemy encounters will give you the option of doing this. A lot of encounters force you to hide behind large cargo crates or walls, not boxes, or things that you can just crouch under. And it forces you to have to utilize the pop around the corner cover mechanics more often. The other reason is that the precision you need to aim with in order to actually execute this is really tricky. Even after having played through most of this game like 100 times when I was younger, and even occasionally as an adult, including this run through of the game, I had difficulty pulling it off more than occasionally. You have to aim just right before you pop off to fire, and if you don't nail it, you'll either miss them entirely or hit their shoulder, which will force you to have to unload into them before they can recover. But if the enemy has some friends around them, you can't risk keeping yourself exposed to just keep shooting. This prevents what would otherwise be something possibly exploitable into a beneficial mechanic with a skill ceiling, and in my opinion, a mechanic that's left much more interesting than its future contemporaries. Games that came afterwards like Kill Switch or Gears of War use the cover mechanic at face value. The only interesting thing that either game does with its cover mechanic is just blind fire. And to be honest, in my opinion, the best mechanic in Gears of War isn't even the cover mechanic, it's the reload minigame. And on top of all of this, there is a simple and somewhat hidden feature that Winback has. Relative to where you are in cover, whether it's close to the edge or further towards the center, Jean-Luc will have 2 different animations for coming out of cover. And yes, this is the same for crouch covering as well. You can utilize this for strategic advantage or just making some really cool cinematic action photo finishes to gunfights. This is what makes Winback such an interesting game mechanically, because as you get more and more used to this functionality, you understand that while overall pretty simple, there is a surprising amount of nuance to it. For instance, you'll very quickly notice that your pistol has unlimited ammo. Your shotgun and submachine gun both work on you finding ammo, but interestingly, only adding to the mild simulation feel that Winback strives for, the clips of your gun are not expendable. If you reload your submachine gun after only firing half the clip, you're going to lose the entire other half the clip when you swap magazines. And even though you're going to be picking up pouches that will allow you to hold more ammo, you're only going to be able to hold about 3 magazines and about 16 shotgun shells in your pockets for the whole game. This means that you're going to want to expunge as much ammo as possible before you reload for both your submachine gun and your pistol. So what's the point of your other weapons? Why would you ever use your shotgun or MP5 if they can run out of ammo in the middle of a firefight and you'll be caught with your pants down? Well, weapon power for one, but the most mechanically interesting aspect is weapon range. Now, obviously this can refer to just the damage range of your weapons. Your shotgun sure as hell ain't doing as much damage as your MP5 from across the hall, but this comes down to even the range of your weapon's ability to lock on. So if you find yourself in an open area or a long hallway, it may be possible that your pistol or shotgun won't be able to reliably lock on to any enemy. Your submachine gun has the longest target range of all of your other weapons. There is also a satisfying use for each weapon in terms of strategy. Your shotgun is pretty obviously good for crowd control, as it can hit about 3 guys close to each other at once, and your submachine gun is really good for stun locking an enemy when you're low on health, as the gun shoots fast enough to essentially just put them out of commission until you can kill them. All of this just adds another little layer to this delicious store-bought lasagna. See, I told you it was fucking good for a frozen one, didn't I? But beyond the cover mechanics, the game exudes excellent level design. Using the restrictions of the N64, Winback keeps its levels in pretty confined areas, but shockingly utilizes backtracking to a super interesting and, dare I say it, a manner similar to Dark Souls? I kid, but only a little bit. So, to start things off in a strange fashion, in a game like Winback, with its admittedly pretty generic health system, you would think that taking health packs whenever you find them would be the correct move. Take damage, recover health, bada bing, gabagool, end of story. Well, no. See, Winback is designed in such a fashion that it's not a straightforward point A to point B sort of world. You'll be backtracking, looping around to areas of levels that you had been to, and solving very simple puzzles that will put you in places you had seen before, but been unable to reach beforehand. And I want to clarify that I'm not really like an expert in level design or game design by any stretch of the imagination, and by that I mean I have zero skill, but I'm going to be doing my best to explain why I think that the level design of this game is shockingly well done and still holds up by going over the first main areas leading up to the first big building that you come across. So, Winback opens up with the outskirts of the terrorist group, and you have to make your way to this first laser death puzzle. But on your way there, you may or may not notice this building just behind a small little stone wall. It's understandable that you would see it and probably try to get there, but seeing as John Luke can't jump except when it's for plot purposes, you're just gonna have to ignore it. So you get all the way up to this laser puzzle, and you'll eventually come to this ladder, which brings you to a man-made canal. If you go forward, you'll see a pair of blue lasers that actually don't harm you, but alert a bunch of enemies to your position that will most likely kill you anyway. So you have to go up and around to here to take out this laser box safely, and then head back down only to get cut off again, forcing you to back up on the other side of the wall where the laser box was. Cross this bridge, then through this fence, back down to the canal, face another laser box, but this time you're under pressure as you're being ganked by 2 guys in the first major instance of a moving laser. After that, you push to the second area of the first major section, and this is where cover becomes unavoidable. Maneuvering in and around the big open space covered with cargo crates, big and small, is a necessity, as guys will come at you from the ground and higher up on top of said crates. There's a big truck to your left, so the only way forward is to your right. And timing will be of the utmost importance, as this is your first instance of a 3-man squad out in the open. You come across a laser wall but can easily pinpoint shot the box, but you may not see this guy right here and get hit, forcing you back into cover. Once you pass this guy, you'll find a door that's locked, so you'll turn around and see a walkway leading up into this big building that has been looming over you since the very beginning of the game. Once inside, you'll notice there is an open walled room that has one laser that's gatekeeping a medkit. This actually demonstrates something that I was talking about earlier, and what Winback does so well, so I'm going to come back to it. But as you press onward into the next room, you're greeted by 3 conveyor belts and some dudes, so you guessed it, duck and cover. Once you make it past them, you find another laser wall, but strangely enough, no laser box. There's a strange keypad looking thing on the wall, but they actually don't get rid of anything. They start moving the conveyor belts behind you, which will allow you to find the laser box. Pushing forward out on the other side of the building, you find another laser wall that insta-kills one stupid dude, but leaves another one that just happens to have better timing. So, you can kill this guy if you want, but you're officially at a dead end. Well, what now? The other rooms in the building lead to ammo, not a way forward. So you go back in, because it's really the only way you can go, and if you look on the map, there's a room that you couldn't access before, but holy shit, this guy fucking blows through the wall out of nowhere! And now you have access to continue forward. So you continue up the ladder, which leads to the top of the building where you saw this guy here earlier. Now you can get the vantage point and take out some guys coming down at you below. Then comes the first implementation of optional stealth, where you hide behind these crates to get a 1-up on the 2 guys in this room. If you fail, you just have to deal with more guys that come in. Like I said, it's optional stealth. Out on the other side and down the ladder, and boom, you're on the other side of that big truck from earlier. You can take out the laser box and go back inside, but you still don't have the key to access the door from earlier. So you go through this door here and look at that! You're back at the beginning of the fucking game! On the other side of that wall that you couldn't get to. Here is the key. Go back the way you came and you'll pass by this elusive medkit. If you had left it, you'll give yourself a gift from the past. And this is what I was talking about. This is the subtle thing that Winback does, and that it's reward you for forward thinking and planning ahead. It's understandable to criticize this because on your first attempt you won't really always know where and when these instances will come up, but it's such a satisfying feeling to come back to something like this medkit after realizing you don't need it. Press onward back to the door that was locked, you fight a couple more guys, and finally you reach the end of the second part of the first area. And already you're seeing how the game is pushing you forward constantly. Even though you're backtracking and I guess in a sense technically meandering up and over just to get to some place directly in front of you, a sense of pace is never lost. Encounters are always treacherous, and when you get to the later stages of the game where enemy placement and puzzles are more complex and deadly, you may be surprised to find that the tension of combat never goes away. The most shocking thing is that Winback is never unfair, just punishing. Of course, Winback isn't some impeccable, infallible, flawless masterpiece that somehow saw through the flow of time, pinpointed the future of gaming with its laser sight, and nailed a headshot. There are definitely some things with the overall controls that still don't hold up all that great. Like, sometimes it can be pretty frustrating to be on the side of cover and have to flip a bitch back into cover, as Jean-Luc can somewhat get held up by the game's camera. Trying to pinpoint shot the laser boxes can also be a little bit of a bitch because regular aiming without locking on being utilized is still a nightmare. And oh god. Oh god. The fucking voice acting.
Steve!
I don't believe it. You actually came through the front door.
Stop right there!
You've beaten me!
The PS2 version of Winback for some reason added voice acting, which as an idea isn't a bad thing. But if you actually listen to these people speak their lines, it's like they're struggling against being shoved out of this mortal coil and being placed back into the vocal booth. It's hilarious. In a sense, I'm glad that they did this because it gives you something extra to enjoy while playing through the story, but at the same time, like, did no one hear these vocal deliveries and say, maybe let's not? But in all honesty, that's most of the issues that I think still plague Winback. It's not a very long list because the team that made it really cared to make something that stood out and used the limitations of the N64 as a design philosophy to work around. And this leaves me coming back to the question, how does Winback compare to games that came afterwards? Well, I touched on this briefly, but I think that relative to my gaming sensibilities, the slower, more methodical gameplay of Winback makes its design feel so much more natural than most of the contemporaries that came afterwards. In fact, in terms of strict gameplay feel, Winback feels more in line with its previously mentioned Metal Gear Solid 2 brethren. While MGS2 is incredibly stealth-focused compared to the optional stealth of Winback, MGS2 still leans back on its very slow-paced, bubbling blood moments of combat and the random assortment of boss characters that all have their own weapon quirk and very outlandish personalities. Although it's obviously not really fair to compare MGS2 and Winback, as they are very different games, but I think that in terms of what games I'm going to be talking about, MGS2 is probably the closest comparison. That being said, the most obvious game to compare Winback to is Kill Switch. It famously made its cover mechanics the main point of the game to the extent they advertised it in the game's subtitle. Kill Switch. Take cover. Take aim. Take over. And look, I don't know what the fuck the team over there at Namco was smoking when they made this game, but there is zero soul in Kill Switch whatsoever. Kill Switch is every single mediocre PS2 third-person shooter with awful stick control aiming, very rudimentary controls that force you in essentially 8 directions, with camera control that you can maneuver into more specific directional movement. You can look down the sights in Kill Switch, which is a nice feature as it somewhat mitigates the awful standard hip shooting aim, but you can move and shoot in Kill Switch. That may not sound like a big deal, but when you can literally run and gun, that makes the game's own selling point pointless. Sure, at some crucial moments during gunfights like reloading, they require you to get behind cover, and I won't sit here and say that cover is completely pointless, or that you can beat the game without utilizing it, but what made Winback's use of cover feel so natural was its decision to make the mechanics around shooting feel unnatural. Forcing you to stand and shoot really makes you think long and hard about ever, and I mean ever, shooting at enemies while in the open. Forcing this restriction on you forces you to utilize the game's central mechanic, and Kill Switch, not only being a very paint-by-the-numbers game in terms of aesthetics, doesn't even force its own central mechanic on you for what feels like 80% of the game. You can take cover for literally like a second, and then run out and just start shooting. It trivializes the entire focus of the game, or at least the intended one. Gears of War, however, is probably the best known comparison, as the whole trilogy has been known as a cover shooter staple and is probably the single most impactful game of the entire subgenre when it comes to popularity and sales numbers. And look, I'll admit that the only game in the whole series that I've actually played is the first one. I enjoyed it while playing with a friend, but the only reason that I finally got around to actually playing through the whole thing is because it was on Game Pass. Gears 2 and 3 aren't, so I can really only talk about the first one. That being said, the game utilizes cover much better than Kill Switch and forces you into cover for pretty much every single encounter. They utilize blind fire, which, is a cover mechanic, but just like Kill Switch, they don't really do much with it, and just like Kill Switch, they kind of put their own main mechanical idea in the background. The strange thing about Gears, though, is that because of its heavy emphasis on tactical realism, and though its AI is much more advanced than Winback's, it leaves Gears' combat feeling incredibly samey. The differences in the combat are in the occasional drops of different enemy types like the Big Berserker, the Brumac, and the Krill, but all of the standard enemy encounters, to me, just ended up all kind of feeling the same. It's not that each one is bad or boring, but they eventually just blend together in my head. Like I said, it has better AI than Winback, but because the enemies of Gears are all so aggressive, they only really have like a few things that they ever rotate between: hide far away, charge at you, or be somewhere in the middle of that. The issue that I think Gears 1 runs into because of this more realistic aggression is the placement of enemies is never interesting. What Winback does is have preset pathways for every enemy and every single encounter in the game that are designed around mobbing you and making you feel like the AI is smarter than they are. Every playthrough will have the same enemy placement, and at first it's just part of the game, but afterwards it becomes a trick that you can utilize and take advantage of on later runs to beat Winback at its own game, so to say. Obviously it's a very taste-based opinion here, but honestly I like the slower paced deliberate action of Winback compared to the cacophony of actions and reactions that Gears of War dictates you to accommodate for. Time has thankfully been kinder to Winback, not only in overall gameplay departments, but in terms of consumer nostalgia. I remember about like a decade ago, people were talking back fondly about Killswitch, and I would rarely ever see Winback mentioned in influential PS2 games or just influential shooters. But recently, I've been seeing Winback become more and more recognized for what it did, and honestly, I think it deserves even more recognition. So if you have never somehow heard of this game or have avoided giving it a try, I hope that I was able to convince you to give it a shot. I think that if you do, you will keep finding yourself surprised at what Winback did so many years ago.
Tomato is a fruit, but it also a vegetable.